people are still reacting to news that Felicity Huffman is going to jail. The Desperate Housewives star was sentenced Friday to 14 days plus a $30,000 fine for paying to boost her daughter's SAT scores. She's the first person to be sentenced in the college admissions scandal. So does the punishment fit the crime here? Can you really learn a lesson of any sort in 14 days? What are we thinking?
Let's throw it to Carolyn on Facebook, who writes, judge's sentence was adequate. She admitted her guilt. Lori Loughlin, on the other hand, should get at least 5 years. She still thinks she's above the law. Lori Loughlin, as you know, also charged, but she is fighting this. She has pled not guilty, and she has been accused of spending upwards of $500,000 in her case. So that's what Carolyn says.
I mean, I just feel like she probably could have been put to better. Like, she's not a danger to society, okay? Right? Like, I think that she's somebody who probably we could have used her skill sets a little bit, but you know what I mean? Like, got her to go out into the community and do
help some kids.
Help some kids.
Did some workshops.
Yeah.
Did some things. She's talented, right? I gotta tell you, Twitter went crazy, social media went crazy, in particular Black Twitter. Yeah. Because all of a sudden we started seeing, it's true, right? You guys have heard of Black Twitter. All of a sudden, we started seeing cases of other women and the sentences that they got for other crimes in comparison to Felicity's. So there's a woman named Crystal Mason, for example. She's from Texas. She went to jail for tax evasion. She, though, however, got 5 years because she wasn't supposed to vote in the 2016 election. Didn't realize that, and she cast a vote, so she got 5 years for that. Then there's another case, a woman named Tanya McDowell. She got 5 years for first-degree larceny. She was homeless at the time. Her and her son lived in her van, and she decided she wanted a better education for her son, so she actually signed him up in a school district outside of where she resided, and so got 5 years for grand larceny for that. She did have, I have to say, she did have a prior drug charge, so that might have added to the sentence, but 5 years for that. And so people are going, really? 14 days compared to voting and trying to get your kid into a better school? It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up.
But it was interesting, because you're so right? And it was interesting, we were talking this morning about how John Legend had a sort of Twitter rant afterwards, and he was pointing out that we shouldn't focus on the inequities, that he said, and I quote, the answer isn't for so-and-so to get more time, it's for the both of them to get less or even none. But what he's calling for is a complete overhaul of the system, which obviously has predominantly favored the rich and the white. And that is unacceptable, and that is exactly why all of these inequities do need to be pointed out. But is the answer, again, do we want Felicity to do more time as a result of this, or do we need to start questioning immensely how these situations happened with the people you mentioned?
Again, but here's the funny thing. Why are we only questioning the system when there's a white rich woman who feels like maybe she's being like unfairly treated? Like I said the same thing during the Jeffrey Epstein case, you know, because he had committed suicide, and people are like, oh, well, there's problems in the jail system. Now you're figuring out that there's problems because the white rich guy died? Like, so I think that that's part of the problem. We've alluded to all of it. There was a huge Time magazine research piece that was done about 3 years ago, and they were looking at the problem of mass incarceration in the States, because we know there's over 2 million people in jail, and they actually did the numbers and the crunching, and they said about 40% of the people in American jails shouldn't be in jail. Now, you think of all the money. Now, though, you know, you start to translate. There hasn't been an equitable study done in Canada yet. Maybe someone will do that, but you start to look at that and you realize if someone's doing a nonviolent crime, perhaps it's their first time in jail, the question is not like, okay, how much time should they get? I also think the question has to be asked of ourselves. What are we willing to accept as appropriate justice for a crime? Now, I say that because there have been some controversial cases in Canada. I'm not going to bring up any of them specifically, but those that are dealing with Indigenous suspects. And we know that the Indigenous people are disproportionately represented in federal prisons across this country. They only make up 5% of the Canadian population, and yet 27% of inmates in this country are Indigenous. There is a mismatch and there is an imbalance. So the question is, well, let's have more Indigenous or Aboriginal-based systems as intervention instead of the traditional white justice system. The question is, up to what point are we okay with that? There was a famous case where there was a woman in this country who is a convicted murderer, and people got really freaked out when they said she should be at a healing lodge instead of a penitentiary.
Remember this.
Now, I will say this. I think if you're a murderer or a rapist, you should never get out. So that's just me. I don't know what kind of facility. But 95% of people who are in prison today, ladies and gentlemen, they will get out sooner or later. So what do we do with them while they're in?
But both things can be true, right? As you said, you can think that Felicity Huffman's time is better served maybe not behind bars, and you can think that the justice system doesn't serve people of color. Like, I don't think that one has to negate the other, and I don't think it's just sentencing. I think it's the whole, as you mentioned, the whole process. Lately, there have been a lot of films and a lot of art pieces that are made about how unfair the justice system is to people of color. There's a mini-series called When They See Us by Ava DuVernay.
Oh boy, it's a tough one.
One of the hardest things to reconcile is, you know, Felicity Huffman was released on a $250,000 bond, so she didn't have to be in prison and wait and think about what she did and be afraid and make choices based on fear. What happens to many people of color when they're arrested is they don't have the money to be released, so they sit in prisons and they face their reality and they look around, and it's not a country club, right? So they think to themselves, I don't want to be in here for 40 years. Maybe I'll take a deal that is just 10 years or 5 years because I don't have the money to get out and hire a lawyer and help me. So it's not just the sentence, it's from the very beginning, so many people are disadvantaged. So I don't know what the answer is, because in order to overhaul that, I mean, that is a change of not only our own psychology around prison, but it's a multi-billion-dollar change in an institution that actually feeds and supports many people.
Yes, it's a business.
Right? Yeah.
Prison is a business, and this is the other ugly side of it, that there's actually a labor force that has been created with those that are incarcerated, and that's a whole other thing. So it does well by a lot of people to have people funneled to jail on a regular basis.
Oh, it's a big one.
It's a big one.
Let's see what happens with this one, ladies.